What I am about to tell you did not come from a headline. It did not come from your favorite crypto influencer. And it absolutely did not come from the mainstream media that has been gaslighting retail for years. This came from minutes ago developments tied directly to the so called Clarity Act, and the implications are so explosive that once you see the full picture, you will understand why XRP holders are suddenly being talked about behind closed doors at the SEC, at BlackRock, and even in policy circles whispering IMF alignment. And before you dismiss this as noise, ask yourself this extreme question: why would lawmakers rush clarity unless something massive was already in motion? Why now? Why XRP? And why are certain names going completely silent while others are quietly positioning? Because this changes everything. And if you are still thinking this is just another regulatory update, you are already several steps behind. This is not about compliance theater. This is about jurisdiction, control, and who gets to operate at the core of the next financial rail while everyone else fights over scraps. In the last few minutes, language tied to the Clarity Act has reignited a narrative that XRP holders were mocked for believing: the idea that digital assets would be segmented, categorized, and effectively greenlit based on utility and systemic relevance rather than speculative hype. And guess which asset has spent a decade in court, under attack, stress tested, and still standing while the SEC burned credibility and Ripple kept building quietly with central banks, payment corridors, and enterprise partners? Prepare for shock, because when clarity arrives, it does not land evenly. It creates winners and losers overnight, and the institutions understand this far better than retail ever will. Think about this for a second. BlackRock does not lobby for clarity out of kindness. The SEC does not suddenly soften language unless pressure is coming from above. And lawmakers do not prioritize frameworks unless capital is demanding a safe highway. WTF do you think that highway is being built for? Meme coins or infrastructure? And where does XRP sit on that spectrum, right at the intersection of payments, liquidity, and regulatory endurance? The very things that the IMF, BIS, and global banking system obsess over when cameras are off. Now, listen carefully. If you are finding value in this information and you want updates that hit before the headlines catch up, make sure you subscribe right now, turn on notifications, and smash the like button, because this channel is not here to comfort you. It is here to prepare you. And comment XRP Army if you are still paying attention, because what comes next separates informed conviction from blind hope. The Clarity Act is being framed publicly as consumer protection and innovation support, but privately it is about drawing lines in the sand, deciding which assets are commodities, which are securities, and which are something else entirely, a new category that just so happens to fit XRP's long-argued position. And if that sounds crazy, ask yourself why Ripple fought the SEC instead of settling quietly like everyone else, why executives kept meeting with policymakers globally, and why major financial institutions never fully cut ties even during the lawsuit chaos, coincidence, or choreography. Because from where I am standing, this looks less like survival and more like positioning for a moment exactly like this. The mainstream narrative will tell you nothing is confirmed, nothing is final, and nothing changes overnight. But insiders know clarity is not about today's price. It is about tomorrow's access, tomorrow's liquidity, and tomorrow's legitimacy. And once that switch flips, you do not get a second chance to be early. So breathe this in, process it, and understand that the Clarity Act is not the event, it is the signal. And signals like this only show up when the system is ready to move. Now that you understand the signal, it is time to talk about the data points and the authority figures that make this moment impossible to ignore, because this is where the story stops being emotional and starts becoming mathematical, legal, and institutional. And this is where most people's conviction either hardens or collapses. When lawmakers reference clarity, they are not talking in abstract theory. They are responding to years of pressure from asset managers, banking lobbies, and cross-border payment entities that cannot deploy serious capital without defined rules. And this is where names like BlackRock, Fidelity, JP Morgan, and even the IMF quietly enter the conversation, not on Twitter, not in press releases, but in advisory rooms and policy drafts. The Clarity Act language aligns almost perfectly with arguments Ripple has made on the record for years: that XRP functions as a bridge asset, that it operates independently of Ripple, the company, and that its utility and liquidity provisioning separates it from speculative securities narratives. And you do not need to trust Ripple to see this. You only need to look at how the SEC has slowly been forced to soften its stance after losing ground in court, credibility in Congress, and patience from industry giants who are tired of regulatory ambiguity costing them billions in delayed deployment. Ask yourself this brutal question: why did the SEC suddenly start talking about cooperation, sandboxes, and frameworks instead of enforcement? only crackdowns? Why did certain lawsuits stall while others accelerated? And why does XRP keep being mentioned in the same breath as payments infrastructure instead of retail speculation? This is not accidental. This is pattern recognition. Behind the scenes, data from global payment flows shows trillions moving inefficiently through outdated systems, and institutions know that on demand liquidity is not a buzzword, it is a necessity. And when you combine that reality with a legal framework that finally distinguishes between assets built for infrastructure versus assets built for hype, you get a short list very quickly. And XRP has been stress tested longer and harder than almost any other token still standing. Even the IMF has publicly discussed the need for interoperable, compliant digital assets to support cross border settlements in a fragmented monetary world. And while they never say XRP directly, insiders understand that few assets even qualify for that discussion because most cannot survive regulatory scrutiny, let alone integrate with banks. The Clarity Act is not about blessing one coin, it is about eliminating uncertainty so capital can move. And authority always follows utility, never the other way around. And that is why Ripple's relationships with central banks, payment providers, and regulators abroad matter more now than ever, because clarity in the United States does not exist in a vacuum. It harmonizes with global expectations, and XRP already speaks that language fluently. The people dismissing this moment as just another bill have not read the subtext, have not followed the money, and have not noticed which executives stopped talking and started acting, because silence at this level is often louder than hype. And when authority aligns with data, momentum becomes inevitable, whether retail is ready or not. Honored holders, this is where the catalyst emerges and where the weak narratives finally collapse under their own weight. Because every time momentum builds around XRP, the same recycled FUD is unleashed to shake conviction. And every time it fails because it never addresses the core issue, utility plus clarity equals inevitability. The Clarity Act discussion has already triggered a quiet but powerful shift in tone, and the catalyst is not a single announcement or headline. It is the convergence of exhaustion. Institutions are exhausted with ambiguity, lawmakers are exhausted with enforcement chaos, and global finance is exhausted with inefficient rails. And when exhaustion reaches a peak, action follows. The FUD crowd will scream that nothing is finalized, that bills take years, that regulators cannot be trusted, and that XRP has heard this song before. But here is the counterpunch they cannot answer. Why is the language changing now? Why are hearings accelerating now? And why are legacy financial entities suddenly re-engaging conversations they walked away from during peak uncertainty? Because catalysts are rarely fireworks, they are pressure releases. Another favorite fear tactic is the claim that banks will build their own chains and bypass public assets entirely. Yet this ignores reality. Banks do not want to manage volatile liquidity or fragmented interoperability. They want neutral bridges that already exist, already scale, and already survived legal hell. And XRP fits that requirement far better than any theoretical in-house solution. The idea that Ripple's past legal battle is a weakness is one of the biggest psychological tricks in this market because, in institutional terms, survival under scrutiny is validation, not failure. And that is why XRP's decade long audit by the SEC may end up being its greatest asset once clarity crystallizes. Watch how the narrative subtly shifts from is XRP a security to how will compliant assets be used. That shift alone vaporizes years of fear overnight. And when that happens, the same voices spreading doubt today will pivot to why they always believed, because FUD is loud until it is proven wrong, and then it disappears without apology. This is the moment where catalysts stop being speculative and start being structural, where fear loses power because the framework itself begins to answer questions. And when frameworks appear, capital does not argue, it allocates. Should I continue with part 4, the price justification and final warning? Esteemed viewers, now it is time to confront the part everyone secretly wants, but few dare to discuss. The price justification and the final warning, because clarity in law and utility and infrastructure inevitably translates into valuation, whether the mainstream admits it or not. The moment the Clarity Act signals regulatory alignment, XRP ceases to exist in the gray area and enters the realm of institutional certainty, and that certainty is precisely what hedge funds, sovereign wealth funds, and global banks have been waiting for, quietly accumulating while the public debated memes and pumps. Ask yourself this: why would BlackRock, Fidelity, and other top-tier institutions position quietly in an asset that carries unresolved legal baggage? The answer is obvious to anyone paying attention. Once clarity drops, liquidity will flow like a dam breaking, and XRP will instantly become the backbone of cross-border settlements that trillions of dollars depend on. Do not mistake the current market's calm as stagnation. It is a prelude, a quiet before a storm that will make past surges look like minor tremors. Here is the brutal truth. The retail panic that spreads whenever XRP moves is nothing compared to the institutional tsunami waiting just beyond the horizon, and anyone who thinks they have time to wait and see is already lagging. The final warning is simple. Clarity is a one-way street, hesitation is your enemy, and the moment you see legal and structural alignment, those who are unprepared will watch from the sidelines as others seize access to the financial rails of the future. XRP's decade of legal endurance, its strategic positioning, and the timing of the Clarity Act converge to create a rare alignment that is not repeated in crypto, not in DeFi, not in any token masquerading as infrastructure. If you ignore this, you are ignoring history in the making, because when frameworks, utility, and authority converge, price follows faster than almost anyone can react. The next minutes, hours, and days will define who understood the signal and who was lost in the noise. And I cannot stress this enough. Clarity is the fuse, XRP is the explosive, and preparation is the only defense against being caught flat-footed. Honored viewers, as we reach the conclusion, take a moment to absorb what you've just heard, because this is not speculation. This is synthesis of patterns, authority, and institutional intent that few dare to piece together. Minutes ago, the Clarity Act signaled far more than regulatory housekeeping. It illuminated a pathway where XRP is uniquely positioned to bridge the gap between compliance and utility, surviving scrutiny that would crush lesser assets, and offering access that the financial elite cannot ignore. Remember, the mainstream will downplay, ignore, or misrepresent this because clarity threatens their narrative control, and that is exactly why you must pay attention now. If you have absorbed even half of this information, you understand that XRP's next phase is not about hype cycles, tweets, or retail panic. It is about systemic integration, institutional adoption, and legal legitimacy that takes years to achieve and minutes to capitalize on once the environment aligns. Your takeaway is simple but urgent. Monitor developments closely, understand the implications, and position your awareness, not just your wallet, to act when the frameworks lock into place. Clarity is the signal, XRP is the infrastructure, and the coming wave will separate those who prepared from those who ignored the warning signs. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and understand that the story unfolding right now is one the mainstream refuses to report because it challenges the old order. This is your insider briefing, and now the choice is yours. Watch history unfold or watch it pass by while others ride the rails of the future.